Welcome to Cayuga Community College's television studio for the first in a series of debates this month involving candidates for Cayuga County Legislature, Auburn Mayor, and Auburn City Council. I'm Jeremy Boyer, editor of the Citizen newspaper and auburnpub.com, and I'll be your moderator for these forums. These debates are recorded and produced by students at the college and broadcast in cooperation with Time Warner Cable, Verizon Fios, and Auburn Regional Access Media. Today's program features the candidates in the race for Cayuga County Legislature District 4, which covers the town of Brutus, which of course also includes the village of Weedsport. The candidates this year are a rematch of sorts from 4 years ago. Incumbent Mark Farrell, running this year on the Democratic line, won this seat in the 2011 election by mounting a successful write-in campaign. The man he defeated that year, Christopher Petrus, is back again running on the Republican, Conservative, Independence, and Reform Party lines. The county legislature is a 15-person body that is currently comprised of 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats, and 1 conservative. The base yearly pay for a sitting county legislator is $10,100. The rules for these debates are simple. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for a closing statement. The initial answers to questions can also be up to 2 minutes long, and then rebuttals are then allowed 1 minute each. The candidates took part in a coin toss earlier to determine the order in which they'll give their statements, and as a result, we'll start tonight's program with Mr. Petrus. Mr. Petrus, welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'd also like to say thank you to Cayuga Community College and the Citizen for providing me with this opportunity to present my vision for Cayuga County. My name is Chris Petrus, and I'm asking for your vote and your support in my campaign to become Cayuga County Legislator representing the 4th District. This includes, as previously stated, this includes the town of Brutus and the village of Weedsport. I've been a lifelong resident of the village of Weedsport. I graduated from Cayuga Community College with an associate's degree. I also have a bachelor's degree from Oswego State University. I'm a proud husband and father. My wife Heather and I bought the house that I grew up in. We live there to this day with my daughter Isabella. I'm running because I believe that we need to shrink the size of government. When we shrink the size of government, we lower taxes. When we lower taxes, it's a proverbial tide that lifts all boats. As Mr. Farrell is the incumbent, I believe it's incumbent upon me to point out some differences between myself and him. First and foremost, the budget. This legislature for the past 3 years has had a tax increase, last year being the largest. This year, they're contemplating overriding the tax cap. I will not vote to override the tax cap. On occasion, Mr. Farrell has not voted to not fill public safety positions. I will always vote to fill all public safety positions. I have a broad range of experience as a case manager where I've supervised other case managers and supervised budgets and as well as people. I am asking for your support for your vote on Tuesday, November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petrus, and now we'll go with the opening statement for Mr. Farrell.
Jeremy, thank you to the folks here at the college. Thank you for this forum to be able to address some issues and talk to the taxpayers. I have a lovely wife at home, Sharon, and I'd like to thank her also because being a legislator is a time commitment. Several meetings during the course of the month, preparatory time for those meetings, and if it wasn't for her understanding and support, I wouldn't be here. We also have 4 lovely children, and recently God blessed us with a grandson, so we're still celebrating that. Weedsport is a unique community. It's made up of a community of people that are volunteers. We have dedicated members of the Weedsport Fire Department, men and women that work hard to make that one of the best departments in the area. We have people that volunteer time to sustain a food pantry, a historical society, church groups, and other entities. Essentially, it's a community where if somebody is in need, the call is answered. So I was honored 4 years ago when these folks chose me to represent them on the legislature. And if they decide again that they'd like me to do that representation, I would continue to give it 100%. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you both for that, and I appreciate you coming out here today to take part in this debate, and hopefully we'll have some good discussion to help voters get some information. I'm going to start tonight with a question about Owasco Lake and the water quality. Of course, Owasco Lake is a supplier of water well up into your district, and there's been a lot of concern this summer, especially with blue-green algae, the bloom being as bad as it's ever been, and worries that it's heading in a direction where it could even impact the water supply. My question for both of you, and we'll start with Mr. Farrell answering since you went first on the opening statement, is what can and should the legislature be doing to turn this situation around at Owasco Lake?
Well, I think what the legislator should do, I mean, it's definitely a high priority. It's not only the drinking water, but it's also a source of recreational use, which is contributes to our sales tax with folks coming in and utilizing the water. I think the legislator has done a good job staying on top of it. The manure spread off. Keith Batman and Mr. Didio put together some meetings at BOCES that were well attended. They sat down. They created a plan. The farmers, for the most part, are very concerned. They're looking for constructive alternatives to make things better. They're open to the conversation. I think that the best thing that the legislator can do is what we've been doing, is to support in any way through our planning department, through our soil and water, is resolves to this. We've also had contact with state representatives to try to have them down here for funding. We've also had them in the area to try to draw attention to this. And as far as the legislator, is to continue it to be a priority, because it is. It's something that we definitely don't want to see anything more detrimental take place. But our role is to support those entities out there that are trying to do the work.
Mr. Petrus?
I agree. This is an ongoing process and of the utmost importance. Mr. Didio has been at the forefront of this, and he's been networking with other counties through the council that he serves on to explore new and innovative ideas for managing our water. It's, as Mark said, it's important for our drinking quality as well as our recreational activity. So I think it's not something that's going to be solved overnight, because we have a duty to also represent the farmers within our district. But I think in time we'll find a solution that benefits us all.
I've heard, just to follow up on this, and you can each answer, is a suggestion that the DEC needs to be more tougher as far as enforcement and penalties. Do you think there needs to be stiffer penalties when farms do violate the standards that are out there?
Most definitively. And I think DEC, I think a lot of folks have been very disappointed in their reaction to what we see here is a crisis situation with the manure runoff. And when they came in, I think we were looking for more stringent fines, and I think we were looking for more attention to be drawn to it. And I mean, to answer your question, Jeremy, yeah, we were disappointed, and we'd like to see them step in. They're an agency that can carry more clout than perhaps a county, and putting out fines and trying to have some compromises made so we don't have these results in the future.
Mr. Petrus?
I disagree. I'm not sure that we need to focus on the state level for our solutions. The DEC is already a pretty formidable force, and as I stated, the farmers are a part of our economy, and if we stifle that economy, we're hurting ourselves.
All right. Well, I'm going to stick to the water or the lake for one more question. That's about Emerson Park. Obviously, a jewel of a park at the northern end of the lake, and the county just recently approved a comprehensive plan update. And my question for you two is, you know, at that park now, what changes would you like to see happen, and why, as far as making the park maybe more attractive to people going there? And we'll start with Mr. Petrus on this one.
Well, the park is, I love the park. It's near and dear to my heart. I used to be a lifeguard way back in the day at the park. So I think that we should capitalize on that. And the legislature has done some modifications to the park, and they've consistently upgraded it. But I know there's been some talk about a hotel returning it to its former grandeur. If we could do that without increasing taxes, I think that would be something to pursue. But probably a joint venture between private industry would be our best way to accomplish these goals without raising taxes.
Mr. Farrell, thoughts on changes or updates at the park?
Well, I think what we did by putting together the master plan, and this was through the legislator in our planning department, opened it up to the public and had the public come up with a lot of suggestions, a lot of good suggestions. And they were kind of filtered through, and we kind of prioritized things that we're going to be able to do in the immediate future and things that would be done long range. I would also, I mean, we'd like to see development. We would. I like the fact that, you know, that they came in. We've got a catering agency up there. I was a little disappointed. We tried to bring it across to them that we'd like to have like Mother's Day and Easter and things of this nature. We'd like to have them open up maybe during the week for dinner for folks to go there and then be able to go to the merry-go-round. That didn't go the way I would have liked to seen it go. I still think there's potential for something along that line. I hear that from residents. I think it's we're looking at the bike trails now. We're looking at changing the playground around up there now. We do have the canoe and the paddling on the one side. So there is some development going, but all that development has to be done in mind with the respect to the Emerson Foundation and why that park was given in the going back, why it was given to the county. So I'd like to, everybody would like to see the development. Everybody would like to have a draw to be able to go up there. But we also have to stay within the restrictions that we're under there.
Sure. One follow-up to that, the park, obviously there's an admission fee in the late spring to early fall, and that covers some of the maintenance costs up there. But there's been suggestions over the years that the county should do away with that. How do you feel about the parking fee for daily use? And I'll start with Mr. Petrus on that.
I'm not opposed to a parking fee. It helps. It's turned around and put back into the park. So I think that it would benefit the park, and we're trying to stimulate it and grow it. So I wouldn't be opposed to continuing that fee.
Okay. Mr. Farrell?
I voted against the last increase when we voted to the handicap and the senior citizens. And I heard from many people before that vote that they would appreciate it if we didn't raise it. Subsequent to that, when you look at the budget picture of the county at this particular time, as Chris mentioned, and it's not an admission into the park. You can take a bus to the park, you can take a bike to the park, you can walk into the park. There is a fee to park a vehicle in the park. That's where the fee is. But that money all goes right back into the park, and it is a nice park, but it does take money to maintain it. So it's a tough decision. It really is.
Okay. Well, I know we've talked a little bit about the budget, so we'll try to get into that now, and really like to focus on where you're at with the planning for the 2016 budget. Right now you have a proposal from County Administrator Suzanne Sinclair that exceeds the 1.25% tax cap, the state tax cap, but it does avoid job cuts, and it also takes minimal amount from the county's fund balance. So my question for both of you is, where would you like to see things fall out in this give and take with job cuts, tax levy, and fund balance? We'll start with Mr. Farrell on this one first.
2 minutes?
Yeah. Well, and we can rebut.
No, here's the situation with the budget. And you know, Chris mentioned where we differ on things. I differ on the majority running the county, okay? And if you go back and you look at those budgets, Chris, I voted against them. The last two budgets, I voted against them. What needs to happen is this. We need to put people up there that got some common sense and some financial sense. We more or less deal with our budget in the fall every year, all right? In order to be able to get a handle on our budget and our finances, it needs to be something that is looked at year-round. We have no long-range financial plan. We have no long-range plan for our capital improvements. We really need to sit down and get our financial house in order. And unfortunately, that's not taking place with the majority that's up there now. There are many of us, and I've been pushing for the last 2.5, 3 years, that we start in January, we start going through the budget, and essentially we start asking ourselves, what is it we can afford, what is it we can't afford? And we need to look at, there's some different ideas out there. Going in and trying to cut line items right now with the budget we have is going to be tough. We need to look at our operation. We need to look at efficiencies in our operation. We need to listen to our employees and have their ideas come forward on how they can run the departments better and more effectively and efficiently to save some money. We also need to take a lesson from Syracuse under Mayor Driscoll. They did something that was called the Serostat study, where what they did was they brought in departments that worked together on a regular basis. And they asked, what's your department doing that's hindering my department? What can we do to make things work more smoothly here? I did that under judicial and public safety. We brought in the sheriff, the district attorney, probation, the assigned counsel, and we brought the judges in. And we had a few conversations. We need to expand that with all our departments and see what we can do for better operational efficiencies. Thank you.
Mr. Petrus?
So agreed. You have to start, the budget has to be a continual process. You can't be doing that on fourth and goal every year. Having said that, I believe that we can explore new and innovative ways to achieve what we need to achieve. First of all, consolidation. Second of all, privatization. I think if we privatize some of our for example, mental health, if we privatize that, we can take care of some of those legacy costs and the salaries that are based on antiquated Medicaid reimbursements. Furthermore, I think I don't think we should just be put into a box from the proposals that the administrator has. The fund balance is there. We have a fund balance that's greater than what the comptroller recommends. I think we can work with that this year, but in the future, we have to, as Mark said, have a plan to operate within our budget. So I think consolidation, privatization of services, we can accomplish that.
All right. I should have mentioned to both of you, too, if you ever have, you would like to rebut one of these answers, just give me a little sign and we'll let that go. Would you like to do that in this case?
Well, Chris opens up some doors that would be other topics for conversation when he talks about consolidation. And as far as the budget goes and the tax cap goes, those are all topics that we could go into. I would like to rebut to his opening remarks. We can say what we'd like in a campaign, but the facts are the facts. And when you say that I opposed filling a position, Chris is referring to October of last year, there was a position to fill a sheriff's deputy position. We were advised by the county administrator not to fill positions at that time because we were putting our budget together and it looked like there were going to be layoffs. So my feeling, and the people in the committee, because it wasn't my vote singly, but our feeling was, and the sheriff said, that there was no hurry because the academy wouldn't start till the fall, or I'm sorry, to the spring, so we didn't have to hire right away. I felt it would be disrespectful to a law enforcement to hire somebody in October and then call them in November and say, your position's been eliminated, so we don't need you any longer. That's why I voted the way I voted. It was on the advice of the county administrator, and it was in the process of a budget.
Gotcha. Okay, and Mr. Petrus, you'd like a minute to rebut?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Actually, what I'm referring to is, that's one of the instances, but what I was referring to specifically was, I don't know exactly when it happened, but it was when the proposal to have a district attorney, Medicaid fraud, and a Medicaid fraud investigator. That, as I understand, that would have been a revenue generating endeavor for the county, and on top of which it would have fought Medicaid fraud. So that's just another example. I think that we could have thought outside the box and the new and innovative ways that I talk about.
Okay.
Mr. Farrell.
This instance we're going back to, Chris, is a budget. There was a position, okay? We had the individual there. And this is what happens, and you talk about wanting smaller government. This is what happens. The federal government, the state government comes out and says, we're going to give you funding to create these positions. We create the positions. Then they take the funding away. So do you want larger government? Do you want to keep these people? The funding went away. The position was eliminated from the budget by the administrator, okay? A legislator brought back a resolution to put the position back in. I was against it because the funding went away. We can't have everything. You can't say you want smaller government and you want to stop raising taxes, but then increase your workforce. So that's the way that one went.
Do we get a rebuttal to the rebuttal?
You got one more.
Sure.
Okay. All right. It's my understanding that after the initial reimbursement from the state, these the funds that they got from the prosecuting Medicaid fraud would have allowed these positions to be self-sustaining. So therefore, I would not be putting a burden on the taxpayer, nor growing the scope or size of government.
Okay. No. Let me answer with this. Even right now, and when we proposed this whole thing under the CARP grant and going after these people, we all want to go after these people. They're stealing money from the taxpayers. There's no doubt about it. It's the methodology of what you use. There are administrative hearings where you can go after these people, they're disqualified and get your money back. There are also consent agreements where essentially you go to these people and you say there's a case built up against you, and they voluntarily sign the agreement, you get your money back, they're disqualified. Then you can go the prosecution route. You go the prosecution route. The last time we did it, and we did a big sweep, it cost us $10,000 to pay for these people's attorneys when we went after them. So what's the best way to go after it? And you say that this program is going to pay for itself. Open up the budget right now, go to the DA's line item, and you will see right now there's a $133,000 shortfall between the expenditures and the revenues in that. Now, that's in the budget. Now, if somebody can explain to me that there's another line item someplace else where we're getting that $133,000, the thing is, Chris, I'm all for the program, but where are you going to get the $133,000 to keep it going? If it was self-sustaining, like you say, I don't have a problem with it, but we don't have the $133,000.
Anything else? I'd like to bring it back up to like 30,000 feet and try to pin you both down on the tax levy, the tax cap, because the administrator has proposed going over it. Do you support where she's at with that, or do you feel like we need to come under the cap or at the cap? And if so, how would you pay for that? So I'll start with Mr. Petrus on that.
As I previously stated, I don't support overriding the tax cap. I realize that this is easier said than done. But I just think we're at a point where government continues to grow. We have to hold the line at some point. If this means, cutting to the bone at some places, we're going to have to do that. So, but I also, as I said before, I'm open to consolidation, privatization. So I think between that and us, there's some unfortunate cuts that are going to happen. So no, I would not support overriding the tax cap.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that we were promised that when the state had the tax cap, we were promised relief from unfunded mandates, and I would also press our leaders in Albany to capture that relief from the unfunded mandates.
Sure, Mr. Farrell on the
again
going over the cap. Yeah.
Well, first off, the tax cap. The premise of the tax cap, like Chris just mentioned. The state tells you can raise your taxes 1.25% or whatever the tax cap might be for that year. But he's right. We have a $140 million budget. 90% of that budget is mandated by the state of New York. And out of those mandates, they're unfunded mandates. For example, Cayuga County pays about $800,000 to $900,000 a year for the assigned counsel program. That's not the county responsibility, that's the state's responsibility. Interesting article in the paper in the Ithaca Journal a few months back. New York State gets 15% of its revenue from local municipalities, essentially in the form of sales tax. The national average is 3 or 4%. New York is more or less breaking the backs of the county to run their state. So locally, we have to, those are the rules of the game. We have sent numerous resolutions to Albany saying, send us the money. It's not happening. We have to live within the rules of the game. That's the rules of the game. What we need to do is, you can't wait till the fall and decide what you're going to do with the budget. You've got three options. Fund balance, you can spend it. You can raise your tax cap, or you cut services and you cut people. And unfortunately, we're waiting again to the fall to make that decision. It's too premature. I was going through the budget the other night and I addressed it. We're looking at about a $1.3 million budget shortfall in this budget right now. So what do? If we're going to cut 1.3, you can't keep going to the fund balance and taking that money out. There's no homeowner out there that goes to the bank every month and takes the money out to pay their monthly bills. You've got to learn to cut.
So is your answer you want to stay
My
under?
answer is it's too premature right now to be able to say, because I think that the numbers that were given to us already are too vague in nature. So as we proceed forward, the vote that was given the other day was for a public hearing to be given.
Sure.
And to me, a public hearing should always take place. Mm-hmm. We weren't voting to raise the tax cap. We were voting an opportunity for the people to come in and speak. And I think they should have that opportunity.
Yeah. Anything else? Nope. Well, you both have mentioned, I think, some need for cost savings through consolidation, and I'm wondering, are there specific examples that you would like to see the county pursue in terms of consolidating with either towns like Weesport or Brutus or the city of Auburn? And what would they be? We'll start with Mr. I've lost track.
I don't know. You want to
Mr.
go? It's up to you. I'll go.
Right ahead.
All right, you go first.
So I mentioned these earlier. Some of the ideas that I have for this are consolidation of highway departments. I know they're exploring that. But furthermore, one of mine is I think we could explore privatization of mental health. This is, as I said, the Medicaid reimbursements are changing. I think we have an existing infrastructure within the community to provide these mental health services. I think that'll take away a lot of the legacy costs while still maintaining the services to the community. So I think if we explore these consolidation of services as well as privatization of specifically mental health, we can have a budget that comes in under the tax cap.
Mr. Farrell.
Jeremy, for the last 25, 30 years, the term consolidation has been used in legislative races, city mayor race, city council race. We had numerous meetings with the city to discuss consolidation. I brought it up in that meeting, and I brought it up in January, that if we're serious about consolidation, we need to empower Suzanne Sinclair, the county administrator, Doug Selby, the city manager, let them sit down together, get the politicians, and get the personalities out of the way. In January of this year, we were talking about having another meeting for the city, and I brought up the fact that what we need to do is go with a smaller group. We went with a smaller group, and in 4 months we came up with a 5-year plan for consolidation of the motor pool and the highway, and we're working on that plan. So I think what we need to do is, do I have ideas? I do. But a lot of the ideas we come up with run into roadblocks where they can't be done. So I think if we start with the heads of government and then we go into the department heads and let them have the topic and then come back to us with those suggestions, something can happen. But the other thing we need to do is with the towns and villages is we need to cultivate a relationship with them where they want to consolidate and they trust us and want to sit down with us. Village of Wheatsboard had an unfavorable experience with the county paving a road. They came into to the committee meeting, expressed their displeasure, and essentially they didn't get the satisfaction they wanted. And there's other instances of relationships. So if we're going to consolidate with towns and villages, we've got to cultivate a better environment to do so.
Yeah. Anything else on that one? Move on. I'd like to ask you a little bit about economic development and job creation. Cayuga County is paying about $350,000 a year in the budget towards the economic development line. And I'd like you to both evaluate that particular program and how that's going. Is it something we should continue in this path that we're going with Cayuga Economic Development Agency, working with the IDA and some of the other departments, or is it time to rethink that? And we'll start with Mr. Farrell on that question.
I think, Jeremy, it's too premature to rethink that. I think that what we've done is we used to have a lobbying group and a grant writing group. We did get rid of them, so we're having a cost savings there. Economic development is something that I don't want to see as a line item in the budget that gets cut. I proposed about 1.5 years ago. There's a revenue source for us that comes from gaming funds. It's about $435,000 a year. I proposed that money be utilized for economic development to pay the $350 to CETA, and then also set up a fund to the side with the balance year to year. So as we move down the road with economic development, if there is capital investment that needs to be made, we will have a reserve fund set up for economic development as it comes along. I think it's too premature with CETA. I'm satisfied with the job Andrew Fish is doing. I think they're working hard. It's tough to bring in when you're in competition against everybody else in the country and the state.
Mr. Petrus.
I too think that Andrew Fish is doing a good job, but I am not a big government guy. As I stated before, I believe that if we lower taxes, we'll stimulate our economy, and that's our best way. So if we can utilize that as a means to stimulate our economy by cutting that service and also shrinking our government, that's an avenue that we should pursue.
So would you advocate, there's $350,000
It's $350,000 that we could capture.
So would you advocate taking that out of the budget for 2016?
I guess I'm gonna have to say it's too premature at this point without having all the data.
Understood. All right. if you win, you currently are paid $10,100 annually for this job, which I'm sure equates to maybe not even minimum wage when you put in the time that you're putting in there. So my question for both of you is, is the salary adequate right now for Cayuga County legislator? And we'll start with Mr. Petrus on that.
Let me start by saying I will not vote to increase the salary for the Cayuga County legislators. I believe it's a community service. However, as you stated, I think when the time comes down, you are not even making minimum wage. But at the end of the day, I view this as a community service position, so I would not vote to increase the salary.
Mr. Farrell, on that question of legislator pay?
I did not vote for the raise last time. Are you going to say is the pay adequate? The pay is not adequate, but if you're there for the pay, you shouldn't be there. As Chris said, it's community service. I take the base pay. I do not put in for mileage. I do not put in for a stipend for my phone. I do not take any health benefits. Again, I see it as a way to serve my community.
All right. I would like to ask you both about, in your district, Weedsport Brutus. And you alluded to one that I hadn't heard about, so that's an education. But what other top district-specific issues are out there that you feel you can help resolve as a member of the legislature? And I'll start with Mr. Farrell on that one.
Weedsport has its uniqueness. It's right off at a thruway, and it's a nice stop for folks to come in for gasoline, stop, get something to eat. But we also have a canal out there. We have an aqueduct park. And actually, we've had some structural damage out there. So I have been working with Cayuga County Soil and Water and trying to get some relief done there. I've had some contact with state reps to try to bring some relief there. I can't really tell you that there's anything individualized to Weedsport that I would be looking for from the legislator. I think that as we promote better relations with towns and villages, that they're going to benefit from that. And I think as we progress in economic development to try to bring in more jobs and to keep taxes low, they're going to benefit from that also.
Mr. Petrus?
Yeah, Weedsport doesn't have any hot button topics right now, but there are some things that we could benefit from. First and foremost, but they should all be accomplished. Let me preface what I say, but they can all be accomplished at the local level, whether it be village or town, or through, even like I think they're called 403Bs or not-for-profit institutions. So when you reference the canal, you could set up that like Camillus did. Also, the fire department, long overdue for a new fire house, some consolidation of the town and village municipal offices. Again, I would just be a resource to the local communities in accomplishing these.
Okay, anything else on that? Let's move on. You've mentioned the county administrator a few times, Suzanne Sinclair. Off the top of my head, I want to say it's been about 2 or 3 years now she's been in that position. So just from your perspective, evaluate her performance as the top day-to-day government official for Cayuga County. And we'll start with Mr. Petrus on that one.
I haven't seen, thus far, I haven't seen anything terribly unpopular that she's done. I think that so far she's done good. She's always presents a budget with 3 different choices and kind of puts it back in our ballpark. So as far as I can tell, she's done a fair enough job. And I just need to get in there to evaluate her more closely.
And Mr. Farrell?
I think Suzanne has done a good job. I think that there needs to be in the future a better, clearer understanding of the role of the administrator, the county chairman, and the legislators, so she is able to take direction from us and then take that direction and carry it out for us, without without us watching her do that job and so on and so forth. But I think she's done a great job under the conditions that she has there. Yeah.
And what changes? I'll follow up with that and put it to you, Mr. Farrell, first. Obviously, county administrator is a position that we haven't always had, and there has been some, with I think this is the third or fourth administrator, some of that give and take with the legislator about who's really running the show. Are there any structural changes you think should be made in terms of that job description and the powers of that office that you would like to see happen?
Jeremy, I don't think it's a question of structural changes. I think it's a question of structural clarity, and I think that's what needs to happen. And I think what you'll find is, you've got 15 legislators, and there are those legislators that feel that they can walk in and they can say, I want you to do this and I want you to do this now as an individual. And we can't have that. Nobody can have 15 bosses. So there needs to be a clarity in the structure and as far as how the day-to-day is carried out. So not to change it, but to clarify it.
Mr. Petrus, thoughts
I
on the
agree.
position?
We need to clarify the position. Some people have proposed changing it to a county executive type government. That would, is my understanding, that would involve changing the charter, and it would also create another layer of government, more power, and the legislature wouldn't have the input that it presently has. So no, I would not change it, but as Mark said, I would advocate to clarify the role of the administrator.
All right. One of the issues that has come up from time to time with the legislature is the weighted voting that currently exists. And for those of you at home about weighted voting, basically what it is the each legislator has a certain number of votes based on the populations in their districts, which have been the district lines haven't been changed in quite some time. So as a result, there's quite a discrepancy at times between the number of votes individual legislators have. So my question is, this is something that is looked at every 10 years. Would you advocate some changes to the county lines to bring the weighted voted system more down to one person, one vote? And if so, how would you go about getting that process started? Because it's been talked about before and we continue to have the same system. So on that one, I'll start with Mr. Farrell.
Well, obviously for somebody who's sitting in the minority and trying to get progressive budgetary changes, some long-range financial direction, I would like to see a different change, yes. It was actually proposed to me in humor. Somebody told me one time, they says that we should all take an IQ test and the votes would be handed out accordingly. I think, it's another thing, Jeremy, that needs to be looked at. I think that it is disheartening to see the way the votes go sometime, and I think that it would be beneficial to look at and perhaps come up with a different course on that.
And Mr. Petrus?
Well, I too, sitting from the position of the majority in the legislature, concur that we do need changes. The last meeting I was at, a vote failed by one, it almost failed, a vote to receive property for the college. Almost failed because one vote. The way it's presently set up, it's the majority of the whole, not the majority of present, and when you're not present, that's a no vote. It's a really convoluted system. So yes, we need to look at that. We need to change that. I even think we could explore shrinking the size of the legislature. That would, again, possibly a revenue savings. So I concur that needs to be looked at immediately and that problem solved.
I was going to ask both of you about the size of the legislature at 15 people covering the county that we have, and we all know the size of it geographically and population-wise. Do you think 15 is a good number for us to have? If not, what would that be if it's a different number? Mr. Petrus, on that one.
I think we could go smaller. I don't know how small or the particulars of that. If you look at some of the districts right now, District 2, Cato, Ira, and Conquest, District 6, these have much greater weighted votes. So I think we could combine other districts to bring them in line with that weighted vote so they're all even, thereby creating a smaller legislature.
Mr. Farrell?
I've heard the proposal brought, and it was brought by one of the legislators from the city. And I think it's another thing that can be looked at, but you'd have to look at the demographics on how they were going to do it. Like Chris and I, where we are, with the legislator, you probably have about 7 meetings a month. And if we have the time, we would go to the Town of Brutus meeting and we would go to the village meeting. Folks in the city could just go to a city council meeting. But when you look at these other areas that have different townships and villages within their jurisdiction, that's quite a bit of an obligation for somebody to have. So depending on how you broke that up and how much you put on their plates, you know, it could be detrimental that you're not going to get the representation.
Understood. We'll have one final question, and then we'll move into your closing statements. And that's having to do with Mr. Chapman's going to be retiring at the end of this year, so there will be a new chairman of the Cayuga County Legislature. I have a question about how that's chosen. And traditionally, it's been a case where the party caucus has met. The Republican caucus has had the majority power, of course, met behind closed doors and sort of done their deal making and made their case, the people that wanted to have the job, behind those closed doors. My question for you is, would you like to see that become a completely public process? If so, what will you do to try to make that happen? And we'll start with Mr. Petrus on that.
That's a tough one. I guess being just one vote, that would be decided by the majority, and having been a former officer in the Republican Party, I can see how it would be tough to arrive at that conclusion. There's a lot of personalities. I'm not opposed to more transparency, but I think in order to have a free-flowing dialogue and exchange of ideas, I think people won't represent themselves truthfully when it's in front of the cameras, in front of the press. So a caucus is at this time is a good thing, I believe.
Mr. Farrell, on the idea of caucusing for the chairman?
I think it should be more transparent, and I think it should be out there. We're representing the people of Cayuga County, and I think the people of Cayuga County should see, whether it's 2 candidates or 3 candidates, and they should see what they're saying and what their vision is and what their goals are. Unfortunately, under the current system, you're not necessarily going to get the best candidate for the job. You're going to get the best candidate, or the candidate that wants to give the time from the majority party that has the control. So, and that's the thing too, Jeremy, when you look at the 15 of us, there's kind of a filtering factor. Not all 15 people would have the time obligation to be. So you might have the best qualified person, but he's working a full-time job and he can't do it. So you kind of have that filter process that, okay, who has the time to commit, who wants to commit that time, and then when you get to that point, then you have to filter through those candidates. But I think it should be more open than what it is.
All right. Well, I appreciate you both, and we're going to coming in and doing this, and we've wrapped up our questions, and we're going to let you finish up with your 2-minute closing statements, and we'll start with Mr. Farrell on the closing.
Well, again, thank you for this opportunity, and this election year, or this election day coming up is kind of, we haven't seen a day like this in Cayuga County in a long time. There's actually an opportunity for the taxpayers of this county to make a difference, and to look at candidates that are looking for a change. And if they're looking for long-range financial planning, stabilization, essentially bringing in a business sense to county government. The problem with our government is we're reactive, we're not proactive. And there's some candidates out there for re-election, and there's some candidates out there that are running that want to change that. Essentially, they want to have a business plan for the county. So I would encourage all taxpayers and voters to look at your candidates carefully and look at those that you think are going to do the best for the county in the future. And then just in closing, I'd just like to say that there's a lot of individuals that have sacrificed their lives defending this country to give us a right to vote. And I just think all of us probably have a family member that served or that is serving or a friend. And I just think we should all go to the polls this year to honor them by casting a ballot and take that vote, that right to be able to do it seriously. Thank you.
And Mr. Petrus.
Again, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Cayuga Community College, and thank you, Citizen, for giving me this opportunity. And thank you to you, Mark, as well. I agree. This is a big year. There's a lot at stake, and the potential, the change of the legislature. So voters have a big choice. Would you like lower taxes, smaller government, and more civil liberties? If so, take that on November 3rd and take that under consideration. Mark tries to be a budget hawk, and he is. But where it falls apart is if the legislature turns, there's a lot of Democrats that are less frugal as Mark. So that is a concern. So it's not that I wanted to close by saying that Mark is an outstanding individual whom I hold in the highest regard. I really do. But it's about some things that we would do differently. I think we want to arrive at the same conclusion. It's how we would get there. So if you appreciate how I would arrive at these conclusions, I would appreciate your vote on November 3rd.
All right, well, thank you both for coming out today. I appreciate it. I know it takes a lot to get out from your busy campaign schedules and come out here, so thanks for coming to discuss the issues, and thanks for stepping up to run, because that's also something that takes a lot of courage and energy to do. So we really appreciate that. And thank you at home for watching with us. These debates, if you're not aware, are replayed on Time Warner and Verizon, and you can get information on those replay times in the Citizen. We also will have debates posted on auburnpub.com for viewing at any time. And we also have several more forums coming up in the next couple of weeks. On Tuesday, October 13th, we'll have the candidates for County Legislature District 10, which is in Auburn, and it features Joseph Bennett against Jennifer Young. On October 15th, look for the forum for District 8, which includes the towns of Venice, Genoa, and Locke. It involves Hans-Peter Petcher against Joseph DeForest. The candidates for District 6 in Owasco and Senate, Eileen McNabb Coleman and Joseph Runkle, will be here on October 20th. And another Auburn race, District 14, between Mike Didio and Dominic Basile, will be held on October 22nd. The final week, we wrap up on October 27th with the Auburn mayoral debate between Mike Quill and Tim Lattimore, followed on October 29th with the Auburn City Council candidates Pete Ruzicka, John Camardo, Jimmy Giannatino, and Dia Carbajal. And that will lead us to Election Day on November 3rd. Thanks again for your interest in this year's campaign, and please make sure you take the time to vote in the general election on November 3rd.